Hey, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, SPC-209. Whatever time you're consuming this little piece of academic media, I am once again Victor McInnes, your interpersonal communications instructor, coming to you live on videotape from the lovely campus of Aiken Technical College here in the bustling metropolis of Graniteville, South Carolina. Remember, Aiken Technical College, come to see the new traffic light, stay for the higher education. Hey, listen, let's start off by jumping into the Wayback Machine. We're going to jump back to the 25th of October, 1415 in northern France, St. Crispin's Day, to the little town of Agincourt. Lined up on both sides of around the city of Agincourt is the English army under Henry V and a French army that had them greatly outnumbered. That was under, the French king was literally insane, so it was being led by some local constable. The French had assumed that they were going to defeat the English army. They had them outnumbered. They had defensive positions. The one thing that the English had going was the English longbow. English longbows at that time were about 6 feet long. They were made out of heavy yew trees. They were considered a terror around Europe because they were the high-powered rifle of the day. But the French were so confident of their victory, they said that when it was all over with, before they executed and murdered all the French bowmen, they were going to cut their bow fingers off. The first two fingers on their right hand. They were going to cut those fingers off, and then they were going to kill them. It did not go possibly the way the French wanted. The French lost anywhere from between 2,000 and 6,000 soldiers that day, including literally a who's who of French aristocracy for the 15th century. Estimates on the English side was anywhere from 80 to 125 casualties, and the difference in the battle was the English longbow. These longbows, I've had the privilege of trying to fire one once. It literally took all my strength just to pull it back, much less to aim it. And the arrows they're firing are about 4 feet long, and they're more like dowels than what we think of as arrows. And it just decimated the French army. There was also some killing of prisoners afterwards, but the longbow really broke the French formations. The English win the battle. And as they're being marched out down this sunken road, the 2,000 to 3,000 prisoners that were taken, French prisoners were marched down this sunken road. And on each side, on the bank on each side, all the English archers, none of whom who had been killed in the battle, lined up on each side and stood there with their right hand up, showing the French army their two fingers. Okay? Why do I tell you that story? Because today we're talking about nonverbal communication. And nonverbal communication is cultural, it's very ill-defined, and in everything I can find, there's only one well-recognized gesture that everybody understands the context of and knows exactly where it came from. And that is, today, among anywhere you go to in the British Commonwealth, anywhere in the world there was a British imperial outpost, I've seen Afghans do this. That is an obscene gesture. It's roughly the same as, well, just take one finger away. You know which finger. It's the same obscene gesture. I've used it in France. I've used it in the United Kingdom. I used it in Iraq one time when an Irish guy was pissing me off. Okay? It's known, but Americans have never seen it unless you've lived somewhere in the Commonwealth. George Bush, 41, the first George Bush president, went on a trip to Australia back, I think, in 1989 and rode through the streets of Sydney thinking he was showing the V for victory, and he was really just flipping everybody off. The Australians, being the Australians, found that really funny. Okay? So I tell that story so we can enter our conversation about nonverbal communication. Okay? Let's dispel a myth right off the bat. You will see, it used to be a few years ago, I haven't noticed them recently, but there would be these articles that would come out. Scientists determined 80% of all communication is nonverbal. That's baloney. Anytime you see that, ignore it, because I will tell you, I drive I-20 from between Grovetown and the first Aiken exit a lot. I go across the canal, across the river where there's all that construction going on. And let me tell you, people who drive through there, with the exception of myself, are stupid. And I have people cut me off all the time. I have people tailgating me all the time. And when they come by me, or I catch up to them just through happenstance, I never speed up to do this. I will communicate with them non-verbally. I will indicate through hand gestures my opinion of their driving prowess. I don't say anything. I'm not one of those guys that'll roll down the window and start screaming. I just give them some non-verbal tips on how they might improve some of their life decisions. Okay? So nonverbal communication can't really be quantified. We don't normally use it like that. It can be 100% of the communication you have with someone. Okay? My kids used to talk about the look. They went in today's beverage again, coffee, and by coffee, it's not bourbon. Okay, and my kids would come in and they would ask for something outrageous. And I would just look at them and go, and there we go, yeah, that's a no. And they turn around and walk out. Within the confines of our communication dynamics, they understood that was a no. So get rid of that myth that a certain percent of communication is nonverbal. But understanding nonverbal communication is one of the most core communication competencies that everybody needs to master. All right? Informal definition. Nonverbal communication is everything but the words. Okay? Nonverbal communication is everything that isn't words. A word has a direct sign-referent relationship. Okay? We can look up the definition of chair in a dictionary and get the denotative definition. We can look at the words that are associated with it and place it in context and get the connotative definition. There is a definition of law. There is no nonverbal dictionary. Okay? Nonverbal communication involves the senses, all of them. We'll talk about haptics, touch, sight, hearing, even smell. And maybe, here's the nonverbal communication. Propane gas doesn't naturally have is naturally odorless. They add an odor to that is unpleasant so that you can tell when there's a leak. That's nonverbal communication. McDonald's is one of the biggest purveyor of nonverbal communications in the world. And there have been huge studies that McDonald's spends billions of dollars, or has spent billions of dollars, to design a restaurant that is just inviting enough to get you to come in, but just off-putting enough to get you to leave. The fast food business model, McDonald's, Burger King, Popeyes, you name them, is to get you in, but not make you comfortable enough to where you're going to want to hang around. That constitutes, in my opinion, nonverbal communication. In fact, that was a huge part of my graduate school, proving that. The U.S. Capitol, it's a huge, large, stately building set up on a hill. Is that communicating to the rest of the world that this is an important seat of government? Yeah, I believe so. Okay, so it involves all the senses, and it also involves paralanguage. Paralanguage. Now, a lot of people confuse paralanguage with language. But paralanguage is how we vocalize the words we use. It's still nonverbal communication. Okay? For instance, if I said, wow, I'm really glad you brought this problem to me today. I really want to work on it with you. That communicates that I'm glad you're here. But if I was to say, oh, I am really glad you brought this problem to me today. I really want to work on it with you. Have I not communicated something entirely different? Okay, so paralanguage is how the non-language part of vocalized communication, how we say things. So it's, and again, you've heard over and over again, it's not just what you say, it's how you say it. Okay? So let's talk about some things about nonverbal communication that you need to be aware of. All right, number one. Nonverbals are very important in conveying emotional content. Okay? How many of y'all have ever gotten in trouble for something you said online that you meant to be sarcastic and nobody took it that way? Okay? I know a person. I will not name their names, where they live, or anything else. And the only thing I will ever tell you will be that this person, in an online discussion on a social media platform, was involved in a discussion and said, well, if that's the case, we should just shoot the president and get it all over with. Didn't understand why 4 days later he had two special agents, see, I turned that around on you, had two special agents from the U.S. Secret Service knocking on his front door, asking if he really planned to assassinate the president. Okay? He said, I was just being sarcastic. And the Secret Service agents both said, how would anyone be expected to know that? Now, when I'm on Facebook or social media of any sort, whenever I'm sarcastic, I always put parent / sarc, close parent, just to make sure everybody understands I'm being sarcastic, because that has happened to me more than a couple of times. So nonverbal communication is very important in conveying interpersonal and emotional content. Okay? Nonverbal communication can be very ambiguous. Always check my spelling. Nonverbal communication can be very ambiguous. There is no direct sign referent relationship. Okay? If I go, is that the same thing as to go in chair? What do you need? I need a chair to sit down. That's not what that communicates. Is it possible that the person I'm communicating with will see that I'm pointing at the chair? It's very possible, but it's also very ambiguous. Okay? Go to Japan. Somebody's going to start yelling profanities at you in Japanese. That's an obscene gesture. Even something as simple, okay, tell you something about my wife. My wife has issues with authority figures. I understand it, knew it when I married her, doesn't get me upset. It gets me frustrated though, because we'll be talking to a banker, we'll be talking to a store manager, we'll be talking to a car dealer, and she will just sit there and she'll go, she won't ask that person a question. She expects me to interpret, what about, you know what, that thing, ask him about that thing. Now, I don't know what the hell she's talking about, because it's very ambiguous. All right, we believe nonverbal communication more than we do verbal communication. We believe nonverbal communication more than verbal communication. It's actually happened. I had a kid, he was a 22-year-old United States Army soldier, show up for work late. It was a Monday morning. I looked at him straight in the eye and said, listen, and he looked like hell, and I looked at him straight in the eye and I said, listen, if you've been out last night, got drunk, and you're hungover, just tell me, are you hungover right now? And he went, no, I'm not hungover. And he didn't even realize he was doing it. He was like, no, I'm not hungover. Clearly he was lying to me. Verbally. His nonverbals gave me everything I needed. So we believe nonverbal communications. When you're at a store and you sit there and you go and you're returning something, and you said, you knew this isn't what I wanted, didn't you? And the guy goes, I had no idea what you're talking about. Okay, in my SPC-205, some of y'all are taking me for SPC-205. I tell you all the time, people think they're looking, people are saying, I'm very much aware and I'm an expert on this topic, and they're standing here like this the whole time. Okay? We're going to believe that you're very nervous and you're very defensive. And that goes hand in hand with nonverbal communication, reinforcing, contradicting, and substituting for verbal communication. It is so important because people will believe nonverbal communication first because when nonverbal communication reinforces, contradicts, or substitute for verbal communication. And that's because nonverbal communication is actually more persuasive and more convincing than verbal communication. Okay? Back in one of my previous jobs, I was a polygraph examiner for the federal government. I ran security and counterintelligence polygraph tests on people. I had to go to a 14-week school for it. And we spent a little time, we spent a lot of, but it wasn't the whole 14 weeks. Learning about the physiology, learning about how the instrument worked, learning what to look for. Then we spent the majority of the time afterwards learning how to interview people. People that had committed crimes, people that were suspected of being intelligence risks to the intelligence community. And one of the things that we had to learn, that we had to get down pat, was to manage and master our nonverbal communications. Because if you went in to an interview and you gave any indication that you weren't totally convinced of what you were saying, if you showed any doubt, even if you had doubt one way or the other, if you showed doubt, they were going to pounce on it and they were never going to give you what you needed in the interview. Okay? Okay, finally, nonverbal communication can regulate conversation. And that's real simple. When someone starts to, my mother-in-law did that to me once. Oh God, I went nuts. My mother-in-law and I don't get along, and we were having a heated conversation one day, and I was trying to make my point, and she started going, that's not words, that's paralanguage and hand gestures. That was a nonverbal attempt to gain control of the conversation. Okay, and a lot of times, first of all, as someone who has taught and has advanced degrees in communication, I knew exactly what was going on. And I responded with the paralinguistics of talking louder. And she did, my wife, who now looks back on it and thinks it was funny, said, I did not know what the outcome of that was going to be, because she said that went on for about 45 seconds. With me raising my voice and her going, okay? And you'll say, I saw Mitch McConnell, former majority leader of the U.S. Senate, when somebody was asking him about funding for the post 9/11 Victims Fund, just went, stop talking. That's not even worth talking about. There's also more basic things where people will, if you're sitting at a table and someone gets angry, one person will stand up to loom over them. That is actually a sign of overcompensation for weakness. If somebody does that to you, they actually feel like they're in a very vulnerable position. So they have to, intellectually and emotionally, so they have to physically try to take control of the conversation. Okay? So this is why nonverbal communication is that core competency that we all need to master. So let's talk about some of the things that make up nonverbal communication. I'm going to start this higher than I did the last one. First of all is kinesics, movement. First kind of movement we're going to talk about is gestures. Okay? And again, gestures is not American Sign Language. American Sign Language is verbal communication because there is a direct sign-referent relationship. I'm talking about gestures like, okay? Yeah, that was the one that we were taught whenever, and again, I always felt uncomfortable. Just before you're about to get admissions during an interview, what you do is you go like that, just as soon as they start talking. And it is amazing when you're sitting in front of someone who's committed a crime, you go, and you just do that, come on in, come on. And they will start talking more. They find that very comforting. Now, if any of you guys are going to be criminals and you're going to take a polygraph test, you're going to get interviewed, I've now tipped you off, okay? You expect to see that. But kinesics involves movement. First, the one that's obvious is gestures. You can always tell when someone is being, just gestures. There's a bunch of different kinds of gestures. There's adapters. Adapters are used to indicate or compensate for an internal state. This is someone who's defensive, feeling vulnerable. Okay, you can't see all the way down, but hands on the hips, 1 foot further forward. That's also going to get into haptics and proxemics. Okay, putting your hand out, leaning in and putting your hand out towards someone, that indicates your internal feelings. But it also compensates. Like when I turn sideways, that is again a defensive posture. Okay? There are emblems. These are gestures with an agreed upon meaning. Again, not anything formal like American Sign Language, but like, I went to Auburn University. I have a lot of Auburn hats, shirts. When I'm walking through the mall, I'll hear somebody go, "Hey, War Eagle." And I'll go, "War Eagle." Or if I can't respond, I'll just go, we all know that means we're number one. Okay? Emblems are normally agreed upon. Again, they are normally agreed upon within a cultural context. And we're going to discuss that when we get to chapter 8. And then there are illustrators. Illustrators are used to demonstrate or show the verbal message. If you guys ever saw the movie Top Gun, if you've ever been around fighter pilots, they will use their hands because the words fail them. So I rolled, and they will use their hands to demonstrate. I gave a 2-minute speech for my class last week on how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And I was talking about take the peanut butter and then scoop it out. And I was demonstrating the actual activities. Okay, so the first one we talked about is kinesics, and that's going to be a lot of gestures. The next, similar, but it's going to be head movements. / posture. Okay. Bigger head movements is more assertive. I remember when I was a teenager asking my mother for, can I go out on Friday night, even though I've been grounded? And if she was like, that was, but I appreciate you asking. If I would say, hey, I know I got grounded, can I go out on Friday night? You need to leave the room. Okay. Bigger head movements are more assertive. Now, how many of y'all have ever had a formal portrait taken and like a headshot, and the photographer says, okay, turn your head this way, smile, and then tilt your head, and then they force your head over to this really uncomfortable. The reason for that is we as Americans and in most of Europe interpret a tilted head as a sign of interest or attraction. Use that when we can go to bars again. When you're comfortable going into a bar and being close enough to someone to have a conversation, if they tilt their head while they're looking at you, that indicates attraction. Okay? Eye contact. Eye contact shows engagement. It can also be used to show dominance. I mean, if you're like sitting there going, okay, looking at myself on the phone was beginning to freak me out. If you're willing to do that, you can establish dominance over another person without ever saying a word, at least in a conversational manner. Okay? There's facial expressions. Facial expressions, you've heard that the eyes are the windows to the soul. The reason for that is we have a lot of trouble managing and controlling what's called the flash expression. When you say something and the immediate reaction is to go. Or what I've always gotten in trouble with my entire life is the immediate, okay? That immediate smile and the wrinkling around the eyes. There's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, most of our facial movements can be controlled, but we're not really used to it. I mean, we're used to controlling our arms and our legs and our torsos, but we don't really spend a lot of time practicing or using our facial, or trying to control our facial contour muscles in order to project a certain image. So that flash is something we're not used to trying to control. Also, the smallest muscles in the body are also the ones that are hardest to control, and those are the ones that are right around here. They manage focusing your eyes, they manage squinting. These little muscles, tiny muscles around your eyes, those take a lot of practice to manage. You'll see a lot of actors that look like really good actors, but then when they go in for the super close-up, it just looks like they've got the dead eye, like they've got no emotion at all. Even though they've got tears running down their face and everything is going, their eyes are just like, yeah, I'm getting paid for this. Okay? We have haptics. Now, haptics means touching. Okay, clearly we have to be very careful about that. It is a very to persuade someone to show that you're really engaged is by reaching out and patting them on the shoulder. But we're in a bit of a cultural, contextual swing right now as to whether or not it's appropriate to do that, because touching someone also establishes dominance. I can reach out and I can put my hand on you, and I don't think you have the capability to do anything about it. Remember, there is no nonverbal dictionary. So when you reach out to touch someone and pat them on the shoulder, you don't know that they're not going to take that as a move to establish dominance and they're going to react to it poorly. But does that mean there's never a chance for haptics? No. I mean, clearly, and again, we're talking about this in terms of people you barely know. But in an ongoing relationship, haptics is a primary tool of showing and accepting touch, or rejecting it, or offering it or not offering it, is a major indicator of your feelings in that instant. Okay? Patting someone on the shoulder, giving them a hug, putting your, just giving a little pat on the leg. Okay? All of that can be used to indicate or to communicate emotion, either support, either sometimes dominance. Okay? So the last we need to think about is proxemics. I had it right. Should have had more confidence. Proxemics. And that is how close you are, the proximity you are to another person. Okay? Was walking, I had to go out. My daughter had to have some surgery. So back during the fall, I went up to stay with her for a couple of weeks. I was teaching online. Wasn't coming into the office, so I could teach from anywhere. So I went up to help her walk her dog. I was out walking the dog, and this guy came up from behind me. And I heard him coming up, and he just sort of walked, and I looked over at him, and I saw him, and he said, "Hey, how you doing?" And I went, "I'm fine." He goes, "Have you seen anybody?" And I went, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Have you seen anybody walking around since you've been out?" And that struck me as a little weird, and I said, "I don't think so." And suddenly the guy took a step toward me. And I'm like, oh, this guy's just seemingly tried to determine if I'm alone, and he's now taking a step toward me. So I quickly, I reacted very quickly. It's an old habit. I got myself in a position to where I was prepared for whatever was about to happen. And taking that guy stepped toward me and indicated, I took that as a threatening move, as the threatening proxemics. And then when I took a quick step back, okay, and made a couple of kinesic movements, he then, said, became very upset. What is wrong? What are you doing? I went, well, dude, you just asked me if I was alone, and then you came at me. And he was like, oh, no, that's not what it was. I'm sorry, I didn't mean, and he was like, we're like, okay. I said, who are you looking for, by the way? And he said, my son. We got in a fight, and he stormed off. I said, what's he wearing? And he told me, and I said, from a long distance, it was a couple hundred yards away, I thought I saw somebody who looked like that under that, where you could see the street light about a quarter mile away. But him taking a quick step toward me non-verbally communicated to me that he was a threat. He was being aggressive toward me. He communicated aggression. Now again, there is no sign-reference relationship. He did not even realize in his mind that he was closing that distance. But he did take my kinesics and proxemics as becoming defensive, and he couldn't understand why I was doing that. So again, we used verbal communication to sort out the nonverbal communication. Okay? Now, the textbook, and you've heard a lot about it, and I'm not going to go into it. There are personal, social, there are public, social, personal, and intimate spaces. Like if I come up to you like this and go, hi, are you here to buy a car? You're going to leave. It's described, it's run down pretty good in the book. Read up on it. Okay? That falls under proxemics. Okay. So let's talk about nonverbal communication competence. First thing, you need to focus on find that you're suffering in terms of communication competence, one of the reasons could be nonverbal congruence. Your nonverbal and your verbal should communicate the same message. If it doesn't, it stands out and people are going to question you and you are going to come across as being less competent in communication skills. Okay? Now, if you go to page 44 in your textbook, there is a large section on explaining ways to be more effective using kinesics. Read that. Okay? So the key thing in nonverbal communication is congruence. Making sure to be competent with your nonverbal communications. Strive and question yourself over and over. Is my nonverbal communication, and again, read that section starting at page 44 about how to make your kinesics, your nonverbal communication match your verbal communication. Okay? A couple of last things to remember. One, there is no nonverbal communication dictionary. And NVC stands for nonverbal communication. Okay? You can't look up a denotative definition of a gesture. You cannot know for sure every time when someone closes a distance and moves from that public to that personal space, or even from public to that intimate space, exactly what they're doing. Okay? View nonverbal communication as groups of gestures. View nonverbal communication in groupings. Don't look for individual events. If I'm sitting here going, hey, listen, I really want to work with you on this. I'm really sure that we have a lot in common, and our two missions goals might just mean that we need to work, that we can be successful. If the only thing you saw out of that is, and you take that as I'm pushing you away, you've missed the entire context of everything else that went on there. Okay? So look at nonverbal communications as a group, not as an in groupings, not as an individual event. And then nonverbal communication should always be viewed in context. Okay? And again, a lot of people don't. Yes, I know you were very upset about being in an accident, but I just kind of saw that you were being distant from me. You sat on the far end of the couch, so I just assumed you were mad at me. Okay? The context was the person had been in a bad car wreck, and so they probably weren't feeling like closing into that intimate space immediately. Okay? I'll tell you a story about the importance of nonverbal communication. I had a SPC-205 student, public speaking. She had, at a local pet store, I don't know which one, had bought a aquarium. She wasn't too sure it was the one she wanted, wasn't too sure it was going to fit. And the salesperson said, hey, listen, we got a 30-day cash return policy. You don't like it, you have 30 days to bring it back, and we'll give you a 100% refund. She was going like, all right, so she bought it. Now, this student was one of my SPC-205 public speaking students that people would not suspect got a really great grade on every speech. Because I tell my public speaking students exactly what they need to get a good grade. And she listened. She was kind of, she was small. Her voice wasn't, booming like mine is. Her gestures were not really overpowering. But she did everything right. She understood the skill set I'm trying to teach in that class, and she nailed it. And she got an A. She's one of the best scores I've given since I've been here at Aiken Tech. She was really good at it. And she bumped into me afterwards. She came in to have me sign her graduation application. And she said, by the way, I wanted to tell you that I actually used something you taught us in class. And I'm like going, I never hear that, so please tell me more. In public speaking, I emphasize a lot, and again, we sort of went toward it, the importance of not speaking. That's paralinguistics. The use of the pause. that by not speaking, you oftentimes show more dominance than you do when you're just yammering on. And I stress that during a public speech, if you're not talking, you're actually communicating to people that you're in so much control and so comfortable being here, I don't need to say anything to you. I can think for a minute and be perfectly comfortable knowing that you will still be listening when I get back to you. In a personal communication, especially in commercial environments, business environments, it is a real dominance tool. So she said she took the aquarium back, she put it on the thing, she talked to the manager, she was at the customer service desk, and she said, she's handed in the receipt and said, she said, I bought this here last week, and the clerk said that if I brought it back within 30 days, I could get a 100% cash refund. She said the manager did everything that I predicted that he would have done. He spoke very loud. He closed distance toward her, took a step in toward her, okay? And was saying things like, and doing gestures like this, like you don't understand, calm down. And he just kept, leaning in and being very aggressive. And he said, oh, yes, ma'am. They miscommunicated with you. There's a store credit. We do not give cash refunds. She said, screaming in her head was this desire to start yelling at him. But she said all she did was she just kept her hands by her side, showing that she wasn't defensive. She kept her hands by her side, just went. Then she very quietly said, I have a receipt here that says returns within 30 days, get a full cash refund. I would like my full cash refund. The change in those paralinguistics, really communicating that this is exactly what I'm talking about. And the manager went right back to, yeah, I understand that, but really we're going to give you a store credit. That's what we're going to do for you. And she just went. The receipt says if returned within 30 days, there's a full cash refund. I would like my full cash refund. And the guy said, again, no, we don't do full cash refunds. You're going to get store credit. And she said, the only thing she could remember right at that instant was to not speak and to continue to force him to make eye contact with her. I have a receipt that says if returned within 30 days, and he tried to interrupt. He said, yeah, we've been over that. And she just said, and then started exactly where she left off. Days. I get a full cash refund. I would like my full cash refund. We don't do that. I have a receipt that says if returned within 30 days, I get a full cash refund. I would like my full cash refund. And I'm just dying laughing listening to this story because she's doing it exactly perfectly. I tell a story about when I had a bad dealing with Sirius XM radio. But I said, how many times did you guys go back and forth? She said, I remember counting 7. And I said, and did you say the same thing over and over again? And she said, yes. And I said, and did you do the same paralinguistics and kinesics and everything that you did the first time? She goes, yeah. And I said, you know what you were communicating? And she said, I thought I was communicating that I'm not budging. And I said, that's exactly what you were communicating. You were communicating steadfastness. You were communicating that you were rock solid. You were communicating total and complete inflexibility. And I said, what happened? She said, after a couple of minutes, the guy stormed off. I just stood there. A couple of minutes after that, one of the other store managers came over and gave me, this is she did, she looked at me and she said, gave me my full cash refund. Best day I've had here at Acatech as an instructor. I was like over the moon for like 2 weeks. But because She practiced. She took control. A lot of people in public speaking and in interpersonal communications, when I teach the class in person, will tell me, I don't speak that way. You have to decide to have communication competence. And the best way you can decide to show people that you have communication competence is through your nonverbal communication. Okay? That's the formal lecture. Actually, it's a little bit more than the formal lecture. Formal lecture and a nice little story. Okay? We've been going for 45 minutes. That's about a good time. Don't forget to read the chapter, because there's a lot of stuff in the chapter that I didn't cover in this lecture because it is kind of tedious and it drones on. So you get just as much out of it by reading as I do lecturing. Okay? That's it. Remember, I am available by appointment with my office hours. You know those. I'm available if you want to via Zoom. We can set up that meeting. Just send me an email. And of course, you can always feel free to email me at any time. So until next time, hey, we'll see you around. Stay safe and take care, and we will see you soon.